So finally, we're going to be hearing from Michael Rowe and Peter Broadwell. So Michael Rowe is a live performance director specializing in new plays, opera, and digital media projects. He's directed plays internationally in Germany, the UK, Brazil, Ireland, Denmark, Mexico, and many other places. He is a recipient of a 2021 Artists and Machine Intelligence Award from Google, as well as fellowships from the Kennedy Center and the National New Play Network. And at Stanford, he is an officiate faculty member with the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, and within TAPS serves as the head of the theatre-making concentration, as well as the artistic director for development. Peter Broadwell is a digital scholarship research developer at the Stanford University Library Center for Interdisciplinary Digital Research, where his work applies machine learning, web-based visualization, and other methods of digital analysis to complex cultural data. He has a PhD in musicology from the University of California, Los Angeles, and an MS degree in computer science from the University of California, Berkeley. Recent studies in which he has participated have involved automatic translation and indexing of folklore collections in multiple languages, deep learning-based analysis of dance choreography on social media, and multimedia annotation of Japanese no-theatre performances. So today they'll be talking to us about their application of post-detection technologies for analysis of performance recordings, in a presentation titled Machine Intelligence for Motion Exegesis, applying pose estimation and related technologies to analyze archival performance recordings. Sorry for the max speed of the introduction, but we're running a little bit late, so I shall hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. This is just like a fascinating panel and a really exciting conference, and I just wanted to also say thank you to Clarice for bringing us all together. It's really exciting stuff. And we are personally really delighted to talk about this project. And we have a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to speak pretty quickly just to try to get through all of the things that we want to kind of cover. All right, here we go. So in this talk, I'm first going to give an overview of the project, and then I'm going to talk more specifically about the ways in which we are thinking about pose, annotation, and viewing. And then Peter's going to talk about the creation and design process of this tool, and then give a short video demonstration of the tool working. Then I'm going to talk about some of our preliminary findings from using the tool, and then we'll go back to Peter. He'll talk about our roadmap for future development, since this is a project that is still very much in active development. I think last week we pushed a new change to the code base. And then we'll kind of wrap up with some lingering questions that we have about this project. So, okay, MIME is a collaborative effort between the faculty in the theater and in the Department of Theater and Performance Studies at Stanford University and developers in the Stanford Library Center for Interdisciplinary Research. In addition to myself and Peter, this project is also developed with Simon Wiles and Vijay Abraham. The project incorporates a suite of software tools for applying deep learning pose and gesture estimation to recorded theatrical performances, coupled with a database-backed web interface to facilitate close evaluation and refinement of data inputs and analytical outputs via interactive visualizations and built-in code notebooks. These computationally oriented research inquiries in performance studies drive the collaboration. We're looking at many different topics within a performance that include analysis of characterization of a range of choreographed poses within a performance, as well as comparative, thematic, and stylistic analysis of a performance. And our approach to annotating the video is to apply machine learning algorithms to an entire video of a performance in order to identify every possible pose made by performers within a performance and to highlight those elements for a researcher. This approach doesn't require the use of motion capture cameras or sensors, and it's meant to be applied to archival production videos, which I'm sure as many of you in this room know, archival production footage isn't purpose-made and oftentimes has a wide variety of resolutions, frame rates, errors, video qualities. the techniques that we're using with analyzing these poses kind of draw on techniques from distant viewing, as well as the computational criticism approaches from the Stanford Literary Lab. MIME focuses on an analysis of performance by analyzing each frame of archival production video, first to detect if there are actors, then extrapolating the pose of each actor, and then from that initial data, the poses are then clustered and sorted so that the poses could be highlighted and overlaid onto each frame of video. The video is then analyzed again with a face tracking algorithm to follow actors through specific poses, and then run through a shot detector as well. With that initial data, with that kind of like pre-analysis and rendering, then we create a timeline of a performance, which demonstrates where and when the performances, which poses happen where and when within the entire performance. And the overall goal is to use pose detection to find interesting features of a performance or to help a researcher more precisely quantify aspects of a performance. And this is the part where I kind of criticize myself. So at the risk of anthropomorphizing, we're also asking a machine to watch a piece of theater, to analyze it through the lens of the pose of a performer. And by asking the computer to do that, we're letting the biases of the computer, their detection algorithms, their extrapolations of the performer's skeleton to guide our analysis of the performance. Moreover, this type of methodology lends itself to an extraction of some of the somatic knowledge of the performers and brings out pretty big questions around copyright, about ownership, about and raises kind of concerning specters around a pure data-driven approach to performance analysis. In talking to my colleagues within the theater department, some have been extremely excited about this kind of work, and others have been deeply disturbed by the way in which this kind of analysis could be used or is possible. And to kind of talk through this, or the way that I'm kind of thinking through this, and having now spent a fair amount of time working with the tool, I kind of want to talk about an approach to looking at pose within a performance, not so much as a distant view, but a very narrow view of a performance. A performance consists of so much more than just pose. These algorithms, when you use them, ignore all of the design elements of a performance. So they don't pay attention to costume, to lighting, to set. They don't pay attention to any kind of like music or sound that might be playing. And because of how they're applied, they work on a single frame of video at a time that sort of ignores the speed and the tempo with which you can analyze or think about a pose. It's hard to tell how fast or how slow these things are doing, but we can kind of sometimes move them into a movelet. And while it is technically feasible for us, we haven't yet run a different set of algorithms to kind of determine the relative distances between performers. Yeah, there's also no narrative in terms of how we're looking at pose. And mostly our pose detection system has only kind of looked at solo figures one at a time. So I think a next step for us is to start to think about the relationships between poses within a performance, because that's a whole huge other thing. So for me, when I kind of think about the sets of limitations in analyzing a performance through pose, it feels sort of akin to reading a novel and only focusing on the punctuation. Certainly you can draw some sets of meaning from that, but this is a partial view of a performance. And I really think that to use this tool, it has to be in conjunction with some of the other annotation methodologies that we've seen presented at this conference in order to get a much more full picture of a performance. Because if you kind of look at it from how the machine learning algorithms see a performance, this is what they see. And it is kind of hard to extract a pure meaning from that. And then when you look at the actual frame as a researcher, you notice, you missed someone, and that the relative depths and poses are much more complicated between this and that. At the same time, I do think that there is some utility in analyzing the movements of the performers on stage with a level of precision that these algorithms allow. One could argue that within the narrow view of pose, there are tremendous insights that you could gain from the precise physical choices that a performer and a director have made. And more importantly, I do think this tool offers a possibility of generating a documentation of choreography or staging for a play or dance that can be really useful perhaps for the recreation of the work or for the tracing of the evolution of our sets of artistic influences or gestures within a performance or across an artist's corpus. Yeah, I should say that. The narrow view does allow for a unique reading, to find poses that have common characteristics to other poses in a performance, as well as to finding unique poses within a performance. It still does require a researcher to do the heavy lifting of interpretation. And this approach to using machine learning algorithms, the human in the loop concept, I think is very important. And I would say that the way that this, we're using this particular data. Thanks. This approach is not so much human in the loop, but human kind of at the end. It requires a researcher to kind of sit with this data and develop an interpretation of it. So as a kind of quick example, I directed a production of Julius Caesar that then I put through this gesture recognition. And I found, and this was not particularly intentional for my staging as a director, but I found that in Brutus's speech to the plebeians in Act 3, that Brutus made this one gesture that then when Mark Antony delivered his friends, Romans, countrymen, the same gesture appeared, and then later on in the play appeared again and again. And so you can start to see common themes or ways in which gesture can be threaded throughout a performance. And this tool kind of like helped me realize or see some of that. I'm going to talk about some of the other findings a little bit later on in the ways that we're displaying it, but now I'm going to hand things over to Peter to demo the software in action.
All right, thanks, Michael. Yeah, you can just start. I'm just going to talk over the demo here. We'll be playing it back. So this is just an overview of some of the metadata that is extracted computationally and from the performances we're looking at. So here's Michael's production of Julius Caesar. Here's the full timeline. You can see the various time series that have been detected, faces, pose confidence, shots, motion of the actors. Also this metric of interest, which we'll get to later. You can see me turning some of them on and off. In just a second, I'm going to try to choose a pose of high interest and low motion, just to see what comes up in the timeline. So here I'm deciding, I think I'll go over here and click. And then we go down below to see what we've selected. Okay, this is a fairly important moment in the production. So there's an example of how you can navigate through the production and through the timeline. Now I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of the just the pose similarity search features that are built in. So I found an interesting pose here, someone filming with a smartphone. And I asked the system to find the similar poses across the production. Here are some of the matches based on cosine distance. Now I'm switching over to a view invariant type of search. We can go up and look at the frame in which the pose was found. Now I'm zooming in on a particular scene to find other matches there. So here's another person filming with a smartphone. I can look up that pose. You can see I can skip the current shot so we don't get all the very local matches. And now if we zoom back out to the full production, we can see we can actually find other cases where this pose is happening, an hour earlier in the production. at the very beginning in this opening scene with the townspeople. And very quickly, I'll also demonstrate, we're working on the system to find similar motions or movelets right now. It's not very far along, so I won't talk about it for very long, but this is a preview of that. It's a very important aspect of the analysis that we're still sort of wrapping our heads around. All right, so now I'll move on to just a few of the other kinds of visualizations that you can see, or analyses that we're doing with the Pina Bausch Vollmann production. So here's just another way of sort of navigating the overall pose space of our production with a timeline and a bunch of average poses that sort of summarize a cluster. Then you can see specific examples of an average of this person lying down, cluster number 8, or maybe it's number 7. So this is just another way of navigating the set that's been found for a given video. We do something similar for faces. This is a bit rudimentary because we're just clustering on facial features. We don't actually have sort of mug shots to go off of, but that's probably what we'll do in the future to make sure we're actually tracking the right actors through the scenes. But we can see some of the principal characters like Brutus here, and actually I can't remember who this is as well. And going back to the Julius Caesar view, our final affordance here is a 3D or a 2D embedding view of the pose clustering using, actually this is the PixPlot tool from Yale DH Lab, but we've turned it into PosePlot, which is a pose similarity navigator. So you can navigate into the clusters. Here's a cluster of people sitting down that has been detected. So we can go through individual examples of poses. I think there's a demonstration here of the new pose estimation system we're using that can complete poses. As Mark discussed, that's an issue with a lot of this work. Here's another set of poses in this pose cluster that I call Cassius standing with arms at their side, and other people too. There's Mark Antony. So that's another pose cluster. And I think there's a final, another seated with hands in lap pose cluster. This is from different angles, so this is a demonstration of how the view invariant clustering works. So the camera angle is no longer important. We've lifted things into 3D, which, as Mark talked about last time, in the last talk, is also an important aspect. And finally, here's one visualization. It's a little hard to see, unfortunately, but it's a timeline view of kind of a city, what do they call this, the skyscraper view, where you can see the prevalence of the different poses across the whole production. This is bin by minute. Every column there is a minute. So that's our quick demo of where the interface currently is. And I'll hand it back. Oh, and I'll just talk now through just a couple of the recent improvements to this work for the pose estimation and tracking. Go ahead. Our previous system was based on OpenPose and OpenPIFPath, that generation of convolutional models. Now, if, in this field, if you wait long enough, the military-industrial open source academic research complex will gift you with new technologies, and that includes these transformer models that basically use the same thing that makes ChatGPT so effective and also so disturbing, the ability to, in this case, the ability to guess the rest of the pose based on what it can see is this new system. So we have an example here of a comparison of OpenPIFPath on the bottom. This is the old convolutional approach, and on the top is the new transformerized model that's much better. It's basically modeling everything in 3D. It's paying attention to like the clothes the actors are wearing, and it's so that the tracking is working in 3D, even though we're seeing the 2D version. It's using the transformer system to complete the poses. So if you can see the numbers over the actors, the lower numbers are better because it means it's losing track of the actors less often. So this is just an example of this kind of technological advances that we're benefiting from. So we can go ahead to the next. And this is just a view of, if you compare the timelines of these two, using these two different algorithms, on the right is the old approach, and on the left is a new one. You can just kind of tell by eyeballing it, there's much better resolution and fidelity with the newer technologies. And other big benefit that we've gotten recently was from a Google project that basically allows us to do this view invariant embedding. So instead of just looking at the cosine Euclidean distances of the key point positions in 2D, we can use this embedding system that will basically tell us if one pose is the same as another pose but rotated 90 degrees. All right, thank you.
So in terms of the things that we've been able to identify, we've been working primarily with the corpus of my work as a director, since all of that stuff is my and the Stanford students' copyright, which we're allowed to work with. But please don't broadcast this too much, but we have also been looking at the work of other choreographers and performers in order to make sure that it's not just kind of based solely off my work as well. So we started looking at a sequence of gestures and dances from Pina Bausch's Kontakthof, which was a great production, since we both had an archival footage of this version, as well as an identical version performed by 65-year-olds. And within this performance, there's also some very clear sequences of movement that reoccur again and again throughout, that these hands on the head poses kind of move from, they start with one dancer and then kind of move to eventually the entire ensemble. And what we were able to find is that the tool both was able to identify those poses and then also identify the recurrence of those poses again and again throughout the entire performance. And in this way, you can start to see a mapping of these types of poses on a temporal scale, in the way in which the repetition of these poses creates a rhythm and a theme to the piece. And one of the things that we've also been working on is the sort of interestingness of movement. So if we take an average of pose by saying, well, the most common pose in a performance is someone standing upright, you can kind of work from deviations of that sort of baseline. And that kind of also lends itself to examining the entirety of a performance as well via pose. So this is Pina's initial kind of choreography, and then this is the same kind of analysis done on the exact same choreography, just performed by a different cast of 65-year-olds. And you can kind of compare the two and see that in many rough ways, the poses do tend to line up in the same places. That then you can allow, that offers the possibility of comparing performances to one another and then also across. So, and I was wonderfully humbled by realizing that Pina Bausch's choreography is far more interesting than my production of Julius Caesar. Okay, and now I'm going to hand it back to Peter to talk a little bit about where we're going.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, so we can just bring up the whole list here. These are just all the various things we're interested in working on next. I won't dwell on these in particular, although any suggestions about clustering and also the dynamic time warping when you don't know what you're looking for to find recurring gestures would be really helpful. Yeah, and at the bottom one, working across videos, across a larger corpus, what is leading towards one of our overall goals of trying to interrogate aspects of directorial style. That's all.
And then I wanted to kind of end because I think as an artist and a scholar, I'm both tremendously excited about the possibilities of this technology, and then also I have questions, and I think there are many questions to be asked about this technology. And one of the first things that we've been confronted with as we started to do this work is really, what is the right question that we should be asking of this data? There is, within a single performance, there are hundreds of thousands of poses, and it's been tricky for us to definitively say something about a performance. And so largely depending on the question that you ask of this data, the data could support many different hypotheses. And I think, there are some benefits to this approach and also some drawbacks. I think it really does require the researcher to be an active scholar with their own subjective view of the performance to be able to accurately interpret this data. And I also think having a human in the loop from the perspective of an AI safety and ethics position is really important. At the same time, I'm also not sure that this particular technology does anything unique that a human researcher couldn't already do, other than perhaps count and define the gestures, which you could do, but it would just take a little bit longer. And so this software perhaps does this more quickly and more accurately than a human researcher. But I still struggle with what is the question that we should be asking with Pose. At the same time, I do think that this work can help us accurately preserve stagings, and especially for the remounting of future productions, this tool can provide significant utility. There are also lots of copyright questions. There's also significant cans of worms around ownership of extraction of movement from a performance, around context, that I think are important. And we've been really locking down this tool and have not shared this publicly because of, I think, some of the many different questions that we have around how you could use this data and who should be using this data and how you could be viewing these productions. And then kind of finally, I think as Mark sort of pointed out, there are so many other different types of medias that you could use with this tool. Between film, cinema, political speech, I think there's also the possibility to use a tool like this for other media beyond just theater and performance. And then, I am an active practitioner in the performing arts, and I'm really interested and wondering about how we could use a tool like this in the development of new work, how we should think about responsibly analyzing, remixing, reusing, expanding on poses that could be pulled from other performances. Anyway, thank you all so much. And
Thank you so much, Michael and Peter. That was truly fascinating and very, very interesting. So I'm just struggling to park myself onto the chair here. Yeah, so we're running a bit late. We're only 10 minutes into the coffee break. Maybe time for one quick question. I think there's lots of questions in the audience. First, yeah. Into the mic, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Test 1, 2, yeah. When you asked those questions at the end, I immediately thought of applications in terms of intercultural performance, the tracking of movement in traditional forms of performance, the Kaskali version of Julius Caesar. Have you explored any of those questions?
We started to, from when we very early on started looking at this, we compiled a bunch of Hamlet's to be or not to be's and tried to do a cross-comparative analysis. And then at the end of that realized, that's not the best example since largely people stand and just deliver that particular speech. But I think absolutely that there's a whole huge area that you could do with kind of comparative cross-cultural analysis.
Melvin, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, I had a question on, is this working? No.
Try again. Maybe it's. No,
I can speak quite loud.
it's like, yeah.
I was intrigued by what you said, what is an interesting part of the choreography? And in the end, you sort of came back to it in saying what humans could do and what machines could do. And I was wondering if you think of authorship attribution, what people in linguistics do, in stylometry, it's often the things that we consider quite boring that are quite predictive of who an author is. And could you do something similar in this, in choreography perhaps, where there's things that are not that interesting, what we focus on as humanists perhaps, that might be actually quite predictive? Of course, this is just speculation perhaps, but I was interested in what you think of this notion of interesting.
Oh yeah. Thanks. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, we've considered some of the stylometric options, and yeah, certainly, focusing on more commonplace elements is one thing. Also, as I mentioned, as Michael mentioned, we're still getting into the question of the sort of 3D scene reconstruction of talking more about how a director uses a space and the space between actors, or uses the z-axis in a recording. So those are other aspects we could look at. So I think there's a lot of inspiration and direction we can take from other media or other art forms and stylometric analysis. But that question is kind of orthogonal then to the question of what's interesting in a production. Like Michael and I have talked about, like, well, how would we ever try to capture like the fact that there's one move that captivates you about a particular choreographic performance, and is that something any kind of outlier detection could ever actually find, is sort of maybe the harder question. I don't know. Yeah.
And I think there is a hope when we started this project that, like, oh, you could use pose as an X-ray to a performance, and I would suddenly, if I give Peter all of my production archival videos, that this computer will return a vision of my work that I had never realized before. And I think largely that hasn't been true, or maybe I'm just not that interesting of an artist. But I think one could construct an argument if you perhaps had access to a large video corpus of a particular choreographer's work to make an argument like that. And at the same time, I think that this, like, looking at a performance only through pose is such a narrow view of a performance that it ignores so much of what I think makes performance interesting, and also elides differences between what an actor does and what a choreographer does. And I think those are also really important distinctions that as a scholar you have to be attentive to. So it would be harder to kind of really, I think I would be suspicious if someone was able to kind of do that kind of full-on style analysis of a performance. But I don't know, I hope. Someday.
Thank you very much. Apparently there are questions in the chat. We're already 15 minutes into the coffee break. I think perhaps you'll be available to answer questions via email or via being around for the next 3 days, for the next 2 days of the conference. So I'm sure the other chairs will be much stricter in terms of time, so I apologize for that. But yeah, I think we'll probably add at least 5 minutes to the coffee break. 20 minutes, is that reasonable? Yeah? Okay. So meet back here in around 20 minutes. Thank you for your patience, and thanks again to our presenters. 3 presentations were excellent.